Welcome to the Journal podcast from the Chartered Insurance Institute, a place for thought-provoking discussion from the world of insurance and beyond. I'm Rebecca Aston, Head of Professional Standards at the CII Group. In this episode, we are discussing continuing professional development, otherwise known as CPD. We will be talking about the FCA's withdrawal of 15-hour requirement under the Insurance Distribution Directive, or IDD, the requirement for CII and PFS members, and the process of CPD audits. Joining me on the podcast today is Adam Harper, Executive Director for Strategy, Advocacy and Professional Standards at the CII Group. Thank you, Adam, for joining me today.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. So I'll just briefly introduce myself, and then I will, as you've described, go on and talk a little bit more about the CPD announcement updates that the FCA issued in its recent policy statement. So within my role, I have oversight of the work that we do from a policy engagement perspective. So inevitably, as and when the FCA issued its consultation document around its proposed changes on the simplifying insurance rules approach, it was something that we got heavily involved in, but also having oversight of the professional standards function and therefore the interrelationship with our CPD activities and the work that we do to help support members in complying with their CPD obligations. It was a really good opportunity to kind of reflect, take a step back and think about the impact that had for both our members and more broadly the impact that it had on the sector as a whole. So after the consultation process, which as I mentioned, we responded to, so in December of 2025, the FCA published its policy statement around simplifying the insurance rules. And within that policy statement, it confirmed that they were going ahead with the removal of the previous requirement, which had been in place since 2018, that firms in insurance markets ensure that their employees complete at least 15 hours of CPD every year. So explicitly, they referenced this by saying that we're removing the compulsory 15-hour minimum as consulted, and this will allow firms greater flexibility to tailor training to specific roles and business requirements. Firms will remain responsible for ensuring that their employees continue to maintain appropriate levels of knowledge and competence.
So this sounds quite like a significant update from the FCA in regards to their approach to CPD. I know that we've had quite a lot of questions from both firms that are connected with the CII and individual members about what that means for them. So what is the relevance of this decision for CII members?
I think, Rebecca, you're right to pick up on the fact that we got quite a lot of feedback. And around the time of the consultation document, we thought it would be really important, not just to kind of state our own perspective on it, but look to capture feedback from a variety of relevant stakeholders. So we engaged extensively with our professional communities, for example, who provided some fantastic feedback in terms of their concerns around the proposals as they were at that point in the FCA's consultation document. And we also issued a wide call for input from amongst the membership, and we had a significant number of responses from members who shared their own concerns around the implications of this. And I think it's important to emphasize that it is very much around the implications, because you could consider that by taking this stance, the FCA was effectively sending out a message that it didn't consider the kind of commitment to maintaining competence through professional development as being important. And we know that that wasn't their intention, but it was hugely valuable to be able to draw on the responses that we got from our members and to capture that as evidence that we then supplied within our response. And I think that played a key role in the way in which the FCA then engaged with us around where it was wanting to take its final decision on this. But in terms of your question as to, what the impact of this is, in reality, I would argue that very little has changed. And the reason for that is that as the CII, we're still maintaining our higher standards of a 35-hour minimum requirement for all members. So that's regardless of the regulatory change by the FCA. And I think it's important to point out too that the FCA itself emphasised that its decision isn't intended as a relaxation of the overall competence and training expectation in their rules. And they furthermore made reference to the fact that making this change would really represent no difference for members of professional bodies such as ours, who would be subject to their mandatory CPD requirements. But if we unpick it a little bit further, the removal of the FCA minimum will mean that firms, and to some extent individuals that are outside of professional body membership, may then choose to adopt more uneven approaches to training. But I think it's important that with the CII member adherence to the 35-hour requirement, that then becomes a really powerful differentiator in an environment where there may be some evidence of variable firm-led approaches to training and development. Our CPD framework is there to help maintain consistent standards, and it gives employers confidence that CII qualified staff will be meeting a recognized benchmark. And it also provides assurance for consumers and regulators that professionalism is something that's maintained despite that regulatory change by the FCA.
Yeah, so we've certainly had a lot of input from our various communities, both in the run-up to this policy statement being announced and since. So it might be a good time just to thank everyone for their input at this time, and say that we are listening to your questions. We've obviously taken on board a lot of your input, and we will continue to do so. It may also be a good time to pause and consider our own CPD expectations for our members, because, as I said, we've recently received quite a number of questions, frequently asked questions by our members. So I'll take them one by one. The most frequently asked question is how many hours are required. Adam's already mentioned that we have a 35-hour requirement for all qualified members, whether you are a member of the CII or the PFS. Just to unpick that slightly more, it's 35 hours of CPD in total, but 21 of those hours should be classed as structured CPD. And the way that we define structured CPD is any activity that's undertaken to meet a set development goal. So it doesn't need to have a minimum number of hours or minutes in order to be structured CPD. It also doesn't need to have a tested element at the end of it. It's any activity that you undertake in order to meet a stated development goal. So that goal could be around understanding regulatory changes. It could be understanding or updating your knowledge on certain products. It even could be things that are more considered soft skills, so things like presentation skills, management skills, that kind of thing. Anything that you undertake to meet that development goal can be counted as structured CPD. The next question to consider are certain topics required as part of our CPD program? The short answer to that is no. Again, our CPD program is very much member-led. We expect our members to set their own development goals, to identify what they need to learn. However, it may be that your employer or another professional body does require certain topics to be covered as part of your CPD development, in which case we would encourage you to ensure that those topics are covered as part of your development goals. The most common ones that we see time and time again in member records are annual mandatory training covering topics such as data protection, money laundering, cybersecurity, health and safety. If they are topics required by your employer as part of your annual CPD, then of course you must undertake those. The next question we get asked a lot is what activities count as CPD. We actually have a handy tool on our website that will help members navigate the kind of topics that they may undertake as part of their annual CPD. So you would just need to go onto the CII website, click on Learning, and then CPD Rules. That tool gives an overview of all kinds of activities, from e-learning, attending conferences, reading things online, peer-to-peer learning, on-the-job training, and gives guidance on whether or not those can usually be counted as structured or unstructured CPD, and how you might want to record those in your CPD record. Which leads me to the next frequently asked question, which is around where to log CPD. We receive CPD records in a variety of different formats and presentations when we ask members to submit their records as part of our CPD audit process. We do have a CPD tool, which we encourage members to use because it's the easiest way to be able to submit to your CPD if requested for audit. And it's a good way of centrally keeping a record of your development for the last 12 months. However, we do know that members log their CPD using a variety of other tools, such as your employer's L&D system, for example, or indeed a CPD record that might be from another professional body. The most common ones we do see tend to be from the CISI, for example. You don't need to worry and think that you have to duplicate those records. As long as you are maintaining a log of your CPD, that's the most important thing, and that it's available to quickly send into the CII should we request it for audit. And finally, the question we get asked a lot is which members are required to comply with these expectations. The short answer is that all qualified CII and PFS members are required to record 35 hours of CPD on an annual basis. There are some notable exceptions, so any members belonging to our retired member scheme, for example, are exempt from completing CPD. And additionally, we will consider either a full or partial exemption for members who have taken a significant break from work. So members who have taken parental leave, for example, or may have not been able to work for a significant time due to illness or other caring responsibilities. In those situations, please do let us know if you're requested to send in your records for CPD audit, and we will work with you to ensure that those exemptions are applied proportionally. So with all of that said, Adam, why is CPD so important for professionals?
Oh, that's a very big question. I think in response to that, there are a number of things that I would draw on to evidence why CPD is so important for professionals. I think first and foremost, it's important to recognize that professions such as insurance and financial planning and risk management, there's such rapid evolution. You talk about new regulations that are emerging, new technologies, and I think also really importantly, how customer expectations are changing quite regularly. There are new product types that are emerging constantly, and I think all of those things point to the need for professionals needing to ensure that they're staying current, and that means that their advice, the decisions that they're making, the oversight that they're delivering can remain accurate and provide real value. I think on top of that, there's something here about the role of professional development in maintaining public trust and ensuring that sort of professional credibility. Professions, like ours, they fundamentally rely on trust. So when customers are seeking to access advice on financial security or risk or claims or products, all of that sort of information that our members will be providing, they expect that the person they're dealing with to be up to date, to be competent, and also to be acting ethically. So what CPD does is it demonstrates that fundamental commitment to professionalism. It reinforces the value of the membership designations that we extend to our members. I think particularly given the FCA's decision, it's important to identify that engaging in CPD does support regulatory expectations for competence, because even with the FCA removing its 15-hour minimum, firms must still be able to show, as we've mentioned, that their staff are competent for their roles. And so what CPD does is in many ways, it provides an evidence base that individuals are maintaining and developing the knowledge that's needed to meet those expectations. And I think if you reflect explicitly on developments under the consumer duty, the importance of fair value assessments, the work that we've been doing and touching on around vulnerable customer requirements, all of those represent really critical examples of areas where CPD can operate as a really powerful enabler of regulatory assurance. I've touched on the kind of the change that our professions encounter, but if we explicitly focus on the advances in technology, things like AI, automation, emerging cyber risks, they really are reshaping the sector. And so what CPD can do is it can equip members to understand those new technologies, to be better able to use those tools in a responsible manner, and make better decisions as a result of their engagement with those tools. So it's something about the mechanism or the opportunity to be able to future-proof yourself as a professional through engaging in technology and that technology developments within your CPD activity. I think we mustn't lose sight too of the fact that it's a really powerful dimension to improving career development and progression, because you go through a process of identifying your skills gaps. You then address those skills gaps by building new capabilities. And I think that sort of process is vitally important. And, realistically, as individual members, by investing in your CPD, you will become more competitive and create greater opportunities for you in what is a changing labour market. As well as being something which delivers a technical benefit, it also requires sound ethics. And I think that what CPD does is it strengthens professionals' understandings of things like conflicts of interest, fair customer outcomes, cultural expectations in some instances, and I think more broadly, those sort of broader behavioural and conduct standards. And you take into account that some of the decisions that our members will make could conceivably have real financial consequences for consumers. And so that underpins the importance of that kind of ethical judgment dynamic. And that leads into the role it plays in protecting consumers and the wider public interest. Those that are keeping their skills up to date will be reducing the risk of things like mis-selling or poor claims outcomes and therefore the resultant potential for a loss of customer confidence. So that kind of role around consumer protection and market integrity is really important. So I think, drawing all of that together, and again, notwithstanding the fact that employers themselves will also benefit because it helps their staff to maintain their effectiveness and be more productive, CPD is essential, I would argue, for professionals because it does preserve competence, it strengthens professionalism, protects consumers, supports that regulatory compliance, and ensures that careers and firms are resilient in what is, as we know, a fast-changing environment. It's a core part of what it means to be a trusted professional. And I think, just to sort of draw a line underneath that, we recognise its importance because we have CPD as something which is codified within our CII Code of Ethics. And I think that's further evidence, if you like, as to how important an aspect of professionalism it represents.
Yeah, what you're saying is really interesting because it's not just theoretical. My team see thousands of CPD records every single year. And some of the themes that you've just talked about there shine through in the records that we're seeing submitted from our members. So the kind of topics that are of particular relevance do absolutely include AI and the development of technology. We see a lot of people attending conferences or undertaking e-learning to understand the wider environment in which they're operating, but also to significantly upskill, which is really, really encouraging. We see quite a lot of people very concerned about regulatory changes and geopolitics coming through as clear themes within their CPD records. The name Donald Trump appears a lot in a member's CPD records, but also ensuring that when the budgets are announced, that they are undertaking CPD to understand the relevance of those budgets for their clients. We see a lot of CPD focused around vulnerable customers. So there seems to be particularly excellent CPD put on offer by organisations such as the Alzheimer's Society. That comes up quite a lot in different records, but also around more short-term or temporary vulnerabilities. So things like helping clients navigate things like divorce or loss. And that tends to be a very hot topic within CPD records at the moment. So it's not just around those mandatory topics I mentioned earlier that are implemented by firms around sort of cybersecurity, but we do really see members taking a strategic approach to their CPD and focusing on topics that mean a lot to them as professionals, but also will mean a lot to their clients. So professional development is a key theme which we see coming through in the records that we assess from our members. Is there anything else that we can do to help our members with their professional development?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on yourself the fact that actually there are a variety of sources that are available for people to access learning and development content, and I think that plays into your point there around how members are already actively taking a strategic approach to their learning and development, and that comes back to the point I was making about that evaluation of where those skills gaps might exist, and that's not just about technical skills, but it encompasses a breadth of what it means to be a professional. But from our perspective, I think it's really important that we're able to provide clear guidance that helps members to understand, what's required of them, and hopefully in doing so, it makes it easier for members to comply, and it provides a degree of reassurance to members that they're doing the right thing. Obviously, we'll continue to develop support resources and provide access to CPD content and learning and development activities and initiatives that will be, increasingly about us looking to develop flexible resources, because I think it's important we reflect the different needs of our members, and how people choose to engage with learning and development in and of itself is something which is rapidly changing and evolving. I think one of the crucial things that this affords us an opportunity to reflect on is the role that the professional map plays. And it was really pleasing that from the CII's press release, they explicitly called it out. They stated that the professional map, the CII's professional map, is something which can help individuals and firms identify training and development needs and therefore plan appropriate CPD. And I think that's something which we were really pleased to see being called out. And indeed is something that, within our own press release around it, that we, emphasize that there will always be a balance to be struck between rules and regulations. And therefore that responsibility on professionals to do the right thing is really important. And we can support our members to do that through the professional map. That gives the FCA the freedom to focus on creating and enforcing detailed rules. And we can then step into that space and help to provide that support. But if I was to draw out specifically why it is that I think the FCA identified the importance of the professional map, it's because what it does is it sets out the behaviors, the technical knowledge, and the supporting skills and capabilities that are expected of professionals at every stage in their careers. And what that means is that it gives members a very clear benchmark of what good looks like. It means that employers have gotten access to a consistent framework to assess competence in what is obviously now a decentralized regulatory environment. It also means that the profession is able to retain a common standard. And we often talk about the professional map as that sort of golden thread that sort of is woven throughout all of our activities. But I do think that kind of common standard dynamic is a really important thing. And what that means in effect is that the professional map kind of becomes an anchor for competence across the industry. What it does for members is it gives them a way to align their CPD with their professional needs. It helps them to identify their gaps and their strengths actually across technical, behavioral and ethical domains. And that kind of comes back to my point about that sort of benefit of the self-evaluation that the professionals will go through in terms of identifying where their strengths lie and how they can play to those strengths more effectively, but also where there may be opportunities for them to develop in their learning. It means too that members can plan in a way that's purposeful. Often when you're dealing with, hours based and we still have that hours based dynamic to ours, it can be seen as a sort of de minimis hurdle that you need to clear. And I think it's so much more important to reflect on outputs and outcomes from the engagement that you do with CPD. And I think the professional map really helps to reinforce that, because it also enables individual members to reflect on whether or not, what they've done has kind of genuinely improved their competence. And guards against, if you like, that sort of superficial tick box approach that might be perceived as being how CPD frameworks are run. So it is something which adds huge value to individuals. And so we can support members with tailored guidance, and through the map, we enable members to self-assess against their expectations, to receive personalized CPD recommendations, and chart their career progression using that sort of consistent competence language, empowering them to take ownership of their development.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've taken away from your answers so far is that self-reflection, and particularly sort of that self-reflection around what's the right thing to do, is so important for members. That CPD isn't just about ethics in the fact that it's codified within our code of professional ethics, but we also see members identifying certain topics or certain types of development as just being the right thing to do. A couple of years ago, we launched the ability for members to tag CPD logged on the CII CPD tool as ethics CPD. And what's been really interesting for me is to see the types of topics that members have self-assessed as being relevant for ethics. And a lot of them are aligned to the ethical competencies that are already charted within the professional map. So ethical development, which has now recently been updated to also include ethical use of AI. So that's been a recent development within the professional map, but also topics that align to vulnerability and are what I would call ethics adjacent. So things like whistleblowing and speaking up, things like sustainability, have all been logged as ethics CPD within member CPD records. And I hope that the professional map is one of the tools that members can use to be able to sort of chart their own development, to identify the topics that they feel are right for their own development, but also to seek out CPD that does focus on those ethics or ethics adjacent topics, because we're seeing them becoming increasingly more important, not just for our members, but also for consumers. And we actually do produce a huge amount of CPD as the CII Group, a lot of which can be classed as ethics CPD or classed as important for career development and career progression. And a number of areas where members may seek out CPDs. Obviously, you're listening to this podcast, so you might be able to access podcast CPD. But there are other areas where you as a member can access free CPD resources through your membership. So those include accessing articles on our journal, on PFP magazine, events through your local institutes or PFS regions, through CII events and conferences, accessing the Future Me site and podcasts just like this one. In fact, our digital libraries have over 300 hours of on-demand CPD. So whatever it is that you're looking for, we hopefully will have a topic or a resource where you can seek out CPD on that particular area. And if not, please do let us know, because we are always looking to develop more content for our members that's relevant to you. We're also trying to make it easier for our members to log their CPD. And so now you can do so directly from many articles and podcasts that you interact with on the journal and PFP magazine, which will be clearly labelled. However, like any standard, the success of CPD is not just reliant on personal commitment of our members, so seeking out these exciting development opportunities, but it must be ensured through rigorous governance and checks. So you may be one of our members who has already been selected for CPD audit in the past, either once or many, potentially even multiple times. And there's a reason for that. So we do have a CPD audit process within the organisation, and that requires us to select members' CPD records to ensure they meet our standards. The main community of members who are affected by this are our SPS holder members, so members of the PFS who hold a statement of professional standing. We are actually required by the FCA to select 10% of all SPS holder members annually for the purposes of CPD audit. So if you feel as though you have been selected for audits very regularly or multiple times, it's likely because you hold an SPS with us, and we are required to select 10% of our SPS holder community on an annual basis. However, we do also select non-SPS holder members for the purposes of CPD audit. It's a smaller population, so you might find yourself only getting selected once potentially throughout your career with the CII, but we are increasing our number of selections for non-SPS holder members, so that may be set to increase in the future. Members' records become eligible for selection for the 3 months after the close of your CPD year, which is often aligned with your membership renewal year. So after 3 months after your membership renewal has gone through, your records will become eligible for selection, and you would hear directly from the CPD audit team if that is the case, and you will be given instruction on what's needed and what you need to submit. So that is usually via email. We do now check to make sure that those initial emails have been received. And if for any reason they have been, our system identifies them as having been blocked by your organization's firewall, for instance, or if you have opted out to receiving communications from us, that email will be followed up by a call from a member of the team. Just letting you know that you have been selected for CPD audit. And again, with that information about what we need from you, the dates of the CPD that we're looking at and that's relevant. That's also an opportunity for you to ask us any questions, or as I'd mentioned before, let us know if you have had to take a career break so that we can discuss either a full or partial exemption from CPD audit for you. I think the most important thing to remember, though, is that CPD audits are not for the benefit of the CII. They are very much, as you've already mentioned, Adam, intended to be a vehicle for building and maintaining trust. So ensuring that, if somebody looks to us as a professional body and says, what's expected of somebody as a CII member. That includes ensuring that your CPD is up to date, that it's relevant, that you have reflected on the learning that you've undertaken during the year, that it's worthwhile CPD. It's not just a lot of events that you've sat in the back of and not really taken it in. We do double check to ensure that CPD is relevant and has been, as I said, worthwhile. It also enables us to identify emerging trends and common development needs for our members, which in turn allows us to refresh our resources and ensure that the topics we cover continue to meet members' demands. A good example of that is around sustainability. So we had started to see in members' CPD records sustainability and green finance being a really key topic for members to understand more about. What we were able to do as a result of that is actually to publish our Green Finance Companion Guide to the Code of Ethics, which is a specific way of looking at our Code of Ethics through the lens of green finance, and to be able to hopefully meet some of those development needs that our members were seeking CPD on elsewhere and bring it in-house and say, we've actually got a dedicated resource for you to explore green finance aligned with our Code of Ethics and ask yourself some key questions about, are you undertaking and discharging your duties in relation to green finance ethically, sustainably, and within our own expectations? So we will continue to identify and map trends that we see coming through member CPD records, although that's not the only way in which you can let us know that there's a particular topic that's important to you. You can always email in our CPD inbox, which is cpdreport@cii.co.uk. That inbox is used mostly for the purposes of CPD audit, and that's how we will correspond with you should you be selected for audit. But we are also happy to receive feedback and input, queries, questions through that inbox. Adam, do you have any closing remarks or thoughts before we wrap up today?
Well, firstly, just to say thank you very much for inviting me to come in and chat to you a little bit further about CPD. And apologies if at any stage it felt like I was on my soapbox. But as somebody who has worked in professional body environment throughout my professional career, it's something which I'm really passionate about, and I think that it's such a vital thing in terms of that distinction between those that are members of a professional body against those that aren't. I think it drives a real key differentiator. So it's something which I really welcome the opportunity just to reflect, both from a point of view of the changing regulatory environment, but also to underpin the important dynamic that CPD plays as part of that sort of professional environment in which we are working. And I think to pick up on one of the points that we have talked about, you mentioned that you hoped that the professional map will play a significant part in enabling that sort of positive engagement around CPD. I firmly maintain the belief that it will very much play that part, but I'm on a bit of a personal crusade to try and drive up engagement. I think we would welcome, so any members who are listening to this podcast, welcome you all to, if you haven't already done so, go through the self-evaluation process on the professional map and start to benefit from the sort of framework that it delivers. And indeed, the more members that are engaging with it, the more that we can then learn about how we can develop it and make it even better and even stronger. It's something which I talked about at the Shaping the Future of Insurance conference last year, and so I will be continuing to encourage engagement with the professional map moving forward. But yeah, I'm happy to hand back to you, Rebecca. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and we'd be remiss not to mention that we are recording this podcast during Chartered Week.
Good point.
And chartered firms are expected in particular to be able to demonstrate to the CII as part of their chartered award that they have clear and appropriate training plans for their staff. And that's absolutely something that the professional map can help to form. So not only if you're listening to this as a member who might be interested in exploring more of your professional development and how the professional map can help you with that, if you're working for a chartered firm, please do consider engaging more fully with the professional map as an organisation organisation, perhaps using it to address the training needs of staff members across a team, for instance, and utilising the support that will give you, because we already know that our chartered firms are really engaged when it comes to ensuring that their staff have appropriate, relevant, interesting and entertaining training. And that's Professional Map is just potentially another string to your bow when it comes to identifying those training needs. But thank you, Adam, so much for taking time to talk to us today on the podcast. It's really appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Journal podcast. You can find useful links in the show notes and related articles on the Journal website, along with further podcasts, many of which can be recorded as CPD and logged directly on the site with one click. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, review and subscribe. Until next time, goodbye.